The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's emergency department flickered overhead as Dr. Patricia Chen looked down at the young woman lying unconscious on the gurney. 26-year-old Kaya Ramirez, a pediatric nurse from the same hospital, had arrived just minutes earlier in full anaphylactic shock. What should have been a routine allergic reaction case quickly became something far more sinister when Dr. Chen discovered the medication switch that nearly cost Kaya her life. This wasn't an accident, Dr. Chen would later tell the police detective. Someone deliberately replaced her EpiPen with a medication that could have killed her. In my 20 years of emergency medicine, I've never seen anything this calculated. This was attempted murder. But the story of how Kaya Ramirez ended up fighting for her life on that cold November evening begins weeks earlier in what appeared to be the perfect preparation for her first Thanksgiving as a married woman.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Kaya Ramirez had always been the type of person who saw the good in everyone. At 26, she possessed an infectious optimism that made her beloved by the children in the pediatric ward where she worked as a registered nurse. Her colleagues often joked that she could make even the grumpiest attending physician smile, and parents frequently requested her specifically when their little ones needed medical care. Standing barely 5'3", with warm brown eyes and curly black hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail during her 12-hour shifts, Kaya had a presence that was both gentle and commanding. She could calm a screaming toddler with a few soft words and a silly face, then seamlessly transition to advocating fiercely for her patients' needs with doctors twice her age. Her apartment in downtown Portland reflected her personality. Walls covered with thank you cards from former patients, plants thriving in every available window, and a small collection of vintage medical equipment she'd found at antique shops. It was modest but warm, a space that felt like home the moment anyone walked through the door. The severe food allergies that had shaped much of Kaya's life were simply another part of her routine. Diagnosed with life-threatening allergies to shellfish, tree nuts, and soy at age 8 after a terrifying incident at a friend's birthday party, she had learned to navigate the world with careful preparation and constant vigilance. Her purse always contained 2 EpiPens, antihistamines, and a detailed card listing all her allergens. She read every ingredient label twice, asked detailed questions at restaurants, and had trained everyone close to her on how to use her emergency medication. Working in healthcare had only reinforced how seriously she took these precautions. She'd seen too many patients arrive in the ER because someone had been careless with allergens, and she was determined never to be one of them. Her coworkers knew about her allergies, the hospital cafeteria staff knew her by name and her restrictions, and she had emergency protocols in place that had kept her safe for nearly 2 decades. Everything changed when she met Marcus Thompson 6 months earlier. Marcus was a software engineer who worked for a tech startup downtown, and they'd met when he'd brought his nephew to the pediatric ward after a playground accident. While the 7-year-old got stitches for a deep cut on his arm, Marcus had been impressed by how Kaya had distracted the boy with stories and magic tricks, making what could have been a traumatic experience into something almost fun. He'd asked her out right there in the hallway, and something about his genuine smile and the way he'd immediately asked about her allergies when she mentioned not being able to go to the seafood restaurant he'd initially suggested had won her over completely. Their relationship had moved quickly but felt natural. Marcus seemed to truly understand the seriousness of her medical condition without being overbearing about it. He'd learned to read ingredient labels, kept his apartment stocked with safe foods, and even practiced using an EpiPen on an orange until he felt confident he could help her in an emergency. When he proposed 3 months into their relationship during a weekend trip to the Oregon coast, Kaya said yes without hesitation. They'd planned a small ceremony at the courthouse with just a few close friends as witnesses, wanting to start their life together without the stress and expense of a large wedding. But Marcus came with something Kaya had never had to navigate before, a complicated family situation. The Thompson family had lived in the Portland area for 3 generations. Marcus's father, Robert Thompson, owned a successful construction company that had built half the suburban developments east of the city. The family had money, influence, and very strong opinions about how things should be done. Marcus's mother, Linda Thompson, was a former debutante from Atlanta who had never quite adapted to Pacific Northwest culture despite living there for 30 years. She still wore pearls to grocery stores and believed that proper families had formal sit-down dinners every Sunday after church. His older sister, Jessica Thompson Mills, was a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties and had married into old Portland money. She lived in a mansion in the West Hills and drove a BMW that cost more than Kaya made in a year. The youngest Thompson sibling, David, was 28 and still lived in his parents' basement, despite having a business degree from the University of Oregon. He'd never been able to hold down a job for more than 6 months and had a drinking problem that the family preferred to ignore rather than address.
From the moment Marcus introduced Kaya to his family, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Linda Thompson had looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain, making comments about how interesting it was that Marcus was dating someone from such a different background. The fact that Kaya's parents were both Mexican immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to put their daughter through nursing school was clearly something Linda viewed as a problem rather than an accomplishment. Jessica had been more subtle but equally dismissive, asking pointed questions about Kaya's education, her career prospects, and whether she planned to keep working after marriage. When Kaya proudly explained her role in pediatric nursing and her passion for helping sick children, Jessica had smiled tightly and changed the subject to her own recent success selling a waterfront property. David had barely acknowledged her existence, spending most of family dinners staring at his phone or making inappropriate comments that his parents ignored. But it was Robert Thompson who worried Kaya the most. Marcus's father was a large, imposing man who rarely spoke during family gatherings, but when he did, his words carried weight. He seemed to view Kaya as an unwelcome intrusion into his family's carefully constructed world, and she often caught him watching her with calculating eyes that made her deeply uncomfortable. The family's attitude toward her allergies had been particularly troubling. When Kaya had carefully explained her dietary restrictions during their first family dinner, Linda had sighed dramatically and muttered something about how complicated it was going to make family meals. Jessica had rolled her eyes and suggested that maybe Kaya was being a bit dramatic about her food sensitivities. Most concerning of all, they seemed to view her allergies as an inconvenience rather than a serious medical condition. Despite Kaya's patient explanations about cross-contamination, the severity of her reactions, and the importance of reading labels carefully, the Thompson family appeared to believe she was exaggerating for attention. Marcus, caught between his love for Kaya and his complicated relationship with his family, had tried to bridge the gap by downplaying the tensions when he spoke to her about family interactions. He'd assure her that his mother was just set in her ways and that Jessica was protective of the family. He genuinely seemed to believe that time and exposure would help his family warm up to her. Kaya, ever the optimist, had chosen to focus on the positive. She loved Marcus deeply, and she was determined to find a way to build a relationship with his family. She'd grown up in a close-knit Mexican-American household where family loyalty was paramount, and she couldn't imagine being married to someone while being estranged from his relatives. She'd started bringing homemade treats to family gatherings, always carefully prepared in her own kitchen to avoid any allergen concerns. She'd volunteered to help with holiday preparations, offered her nursing expertise when David had gotten food poisoning, and consistently tried to find common ground with each family member. But as their small courthouse wedding had approached and passed, the Thompson family's attitude toward her hadn't improved. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse.
The invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at the family's sprawling house in Lake Oswego felt like a potential breakthrough. Linda had called Marcus personally to extend the invitation, mentioning that it would be Kaya's first real Thanksgiving as part of the family and that she wanted to make it special. For the first time since meeting them, Kaya had felt genuinely hopeful about her relationship with her new in-laws. She'd spent weeks planning what to contribute to the meal, carefully researching recipes that would be both delicious and safe for her to eat while being impressive enough to win over Linda's discerning palate. She'd finally settled on a traditional Mexican tres leches cake made with ingredients she'd personally selected and prepared in her own kitchen. It was a family recipe from her grandmother, and she'd planned to share the story behind it as a way of opening up about her heritage and traditions. As she'd prepared for what she hoped would be a turning point in her relationship with the Thompson family, Kaya had felt more optimistic than she had in months. She was ready to start building the kind of warm, welcoming family relationships she'd always dreamed of having. She had no idea that some members of her new family were preparing for something entirely different.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The first sign something was wrong came 3 days before Thanksgiving. Kaya had just finished her shift in the pediatric ward when her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Thompson Mills. It was unusual enough to hear from Marcus's sister directly. Their previous communications had been limited to polite small talk at family gatherings, but the content of the message made Kaya's stomach clench with uneasiness. "Hi, Kaya. Mom asked me to reach out about Thursday's dinner. She's planning to make some special dishes and wants to make sure everything is safe for you. Could you send me a complete list of all your allergies and medications? She wants to double-check all the ingredients. So thoughtful of her." Smiley face. Kaya stared at the message, reading it twice. On the surface, it seemed like exactly the kind of considerate gesture she'd been hoping for from her new family. Linda Thompson taking the initiative to ensure her safety at Thanksgiving dinner should have felt like progress, like acceptance. But something about the request felt off. In the 6 months she'd known the Thompson family, Linda had never shown this level of concern about her allergies. During previous family dinners, Kaya had always brought her own safe dishes or carefully selected items from what was being served after asking detailed questions about ingredients. The family had seemed content to let her manage her own dietary restrictions. Why the sudden interest in her specific medications? Kaya tried to shake off her discomfort as she walked to her car in the hospital parking garage. Maybe Linda really was trying to be more inclusive. Maybe Marcus had finally gotten through to his mother about how important it was to take Kaya's allergies seriously. She'd been telling him for months about feeling excluded from family meals, and perhaps he'd had a conversation with Linda about making more of an effort. She decided to respond positively, typing back, "That's so sweet of her to think of it. I have shellfish, tree nut, and soy allergies. I carry EpiPens and take Benadryl if needed. I'm happy to bring some safe dishes too, whatever works best for everyone." Jessica's response came back within minutes. "Mom really wants to handle everything herself this year. It's important to her." "Could you be more specific about the medications, like exact brands and dosages? She's super worried about cross-contamination and wants to research everything thoroughly." Now Kaya felt definitely uneasy. The level of detail Jessica was requesting went far beyond what anyone would need to prepare a safe meal. Knowing she carried EpiPens should be sufficient information for any host planning to accommodate food allergies. She tried calling Marcus to talk through her concerns, but he was in back-to-back meetings and couldn't pick up. Instead, she sent him a text. "Your sister is asking for really specific details about my medications for Thursday's dinner. Seems like overkill. Is everything okay?" His response came an hour later. "Mom's just nervous about cooking for someone with allergies for the first time. You know how she is about being the perfect hostess. Just give Jessica whatever she needs. It'll make Mom feel more confident." Kaya wanted to argue, but she could hear the exhaustion in Marcus's text. He'd been working 60-hour weeks trying to close a major deal before the holiday, and she knew his family dynamics were always a source of stress for him. The last thing she wanted to add to his burden was by creating drama over what might be genuine concern from his mother. Against her better judgment, she texted Jessica back with the specific information. "I carry AviQ EpiPens, 0.3 milligrams.
I also have Benadryl 25 milligram tablets. My emergency contact info is in my medical bracelet. Thanks for being so thorough. The next day brought another strange interaction. David Thompson called her directly, something that had never happened before. David rarely acknowledged her existence at family gatherings, usually spending dinners scrolling through his phone or making comments that made everyone else uncomfortable. "Hey, Kaya," he said, his voice unusually friendly. "Jessica mentioned you're bringing that Mexican cake for Thursday. Mom's really excited about it." "Oh, that's wonderful," Kaya replied, surprised by his sudden interest in conversation. "It's a family recipe. I hope everyone likes it." "I'm sure they will. Hey, weird question, but where do you usually keep your medical stuff when you're visiting? Like, do you leave your purse in the coat closet, or do you keep it with you?" The question sent a chill down Kaya's spine. "I always keep my emergency medications with me," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason really. Mom was just wondering about logistics for seating and stuff. She wants to make sure you're comfortable and have easy access to whatever you need."
It was a reasonable explanation, but something in David's tone didn't sit right with her. There was an undercurrent of something, curiosity, calculation, that made her deeply uncomfortable. "I appreciate the consideration," she said. "I'll have everything I need with me, as always." After hanging up, Kaya sat in her apartment kitchen, staring at the ingredients she'd assembled for the tres leches cake. The phone call had left her feeling genuinely disturbed. In all her years of managing her allergies, family and friends had asked about her dietary restrictions, about what foods to avoid, about how to help in an emergency, but no one had ever asked such specific questions about her medications and where she kept them. She tried to rationalize the concerns away. Maybe the Thompson family was finally taking her allergies seriously after months of treating them as an inconvenience. Maybe Linda really was trying to be the perfect hostess. Maybe David was actually making an effort to be more considerate. But her nursing training had taught her to trust her instincts about patient safety, and every instinct she had was screaming that something was wrong. That evening, she decided to do something she'd never done before in their relationship. She looked up the Thompson family online. What she found made her blood run cold. A Google search for Robert Thompson Construction Portland led her down a rabbit hole of local news articles and court documents that painted a very different picture of her new in-laws than what she'd been presented with. 3 years earlier, Robert Thompson's construction company had been involved in a lawsuit with a former business partner who had accused him of deliberately sabotaging a construction project to force him out of a lucrative contract. The case had been settled out of court, but the accusations detailed a pattern of calculated, methodical revenge tactics. Jessica Thompson Mills had been involved in a real estate scandal 2 years prior, accused of deliberately providing false information about a property's foundation issues to push through a sale. The state licensing board had investigated, but hadn't found enough evidence for formal charges. Most disturbing of all, David Thompson had been arrested 4 years earlier for assault after a bar fight. According to the police report, witnesses had described his attack on another patron as premeditated and unusually vicious. He'd pled down to a misdemeanor charge and completed anger management classes, but the original incident report was chilling in its description of calculated violence. As Kaya read through the documents, a picture emerged of a family that had a history of methodical retaliation against people they viewed as threats or obstacles. The charges had never stuck, the cases had been settled or dismissed, but the pattern was unmistakable. She thought about the phone calls, the unusual questions, the sudden interest in her medical information. She thought about the months of subtle hostility, the looks, the comments about her being from a different background, and she realized that she might not be going to a family dinner on Thursday. She might be walking into a trap. Kaya spent the rest of the evening pacing her apartment, her mind racing through possibilities. Was she being paranoid? Was she reading malicious intent into what might be genuine attempts at inclusion? Her natural optimism fought against the growing certainty that something was very wrong.
She tried calling Marcus again, but he was at a work dinner and couldn't talk. She considered calling her parents, but what would she say? That she thought her new husband's family might be planning to hurt her based on some unusual questions and old news articles? By midnight, she'd made a decision. She would go to Thanksgiving dinner as planned, but she would be prepared. She would trust her instincts and take every precaution she could think of. She spent the next hour creating a safety plan. She would bring backup medications and leave them in her car. She would eat only foods she brought herself or that she watched being prepared from start to finish. She would keep her purse with her at all times, and she would make sure Marcus knew exactly where she was every moment of the evening. Most importantly, she would pay attention to everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every opportunity for someone to tamper with her food or medications. As she finally went to bed that night, Kaya realized that her optimistic faith in the goodness of people had been fundamentally shaken. For the first time in her adult life, she was going into a family gathering, not hoping to build relationships, but preparing to protect herself. The awakening was terrifying, but it might just save her life.
The morning of Thanksgiving arrived gray and drizzly, typical November weather for Portland. Kaya woke up at 5 a.m. despite not having to work, her mind immediately jumping to the safety preparations she'd planned. The research from 2 nights ago had left her with a knot of anxiety in her stomach that no amount of reasoning could untangle. She lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside her, and tried one more time to convince herself she was overreacting. Maybe the Thompson family's legal troubles were coincidences. Maybe Jessica and David's questions had innocent explanations. Maybe her nursing background had made her overly suspicious of what was actually a genuine attempt at inclusion. But as she replayed every interaction with the Thompson family over the past 6 months, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been naive to miss the signs earlier. The way Linda's smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to Kaya, how Robert would stop talking whenever she entered a room as if her presence interrupted important family business, the way Jessica would ask pointed questions about her background that felt less like getting to know her and more like gathering intelligence. Marcus stirred awake around 7 a.m., immediately reaching for his phone to check work emails even on the holiday. "Morning, beautiful," he mumbled, scrolling through his messages. "Ready for the big family feast?" Kaya studied his face in the morning light. Marcus genuinely seemed excited about bringing her to his family's traditional Thanksgiving dinner. There was no deception in his expression, no hidden agenda in his tone. Whatever was happening with his family, she was increasingly certain he wasn't part of it. "Marcus," she said carefully, "I need to talk to you about something." He was half focused on his phone. "I've been thinking about the questions Jessica and David asked me this week, about my medications and where I keep them. It seemed unusual." Now she had his full attention. Marcus set his phone down and turned to face her. "Unusual how?" Kaya chose her words carefully. She didn't want to sound paranoid, but she needed to gauge his reaction. "In all my years of managing my allergies, no one has ever asked for that level of detail about my emergency medications. Knowing what foods to avoid, yes, but asking about specific brands and dosages and where I store them? That's not information anyone needs to prepare a safe meal." Marcus frowned, considering this. That is kind of weird. But you know my mom, she probably Googled how to cook for someone with allergies and found some overcomplicated article about being thorough. What about David asking where I keep my purse during visits? David asked you that. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. That's random, even for David. I said, "It made me uncomfortable enough that I did some research on your family." I watched his face carefully. His expression shifted immediately. The sleepy contentment disappeared, replaced by wariness and something that looked like embarrassment. "What kind of research?" Kaya told him about the lawsuit against his father, the real estate investigation involving Jessica, and David's assault arrest. With each revelation, Marcus's face grew more troubled. "Jesus, Kaya, I knew about David's arrest. That was a mess, but I didn't know you'd find all that other stuff online." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was stressed. "Look, my family has had some issues, but that doesn't mean they'd hurt you. Marcus, I'm a nurse. I've seen what happens when people don't take allergies seriously.
And I've also seen what happens when someone does take them seriously for the wrong reasons. She sat up in bed, facing him directly. Everything I've read about your family suggests they don't just get angry with people they don't like, they get even. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My family doesn't like you. I know that, and I'm sorry. I keep hoping they'll come around, but... He looked up at her with genuine pain in his eyes. But Kaya, they're not murderers. They're snobs and they can be vindictive, but they wouldn't actually try to hurt you physically. How can you be sure?
Because I know them. David's got anger issues and he drinks too much, but he's not calculating enough to plan something elaborate. Jessica's ruthless in business, but she draws the line at actual harm to people. And my parents... Okay, my dad can be cold and my mom can be cruel with words, but they've never been violent. Kaya wanted to believe him. She loved Marcus, and she wanted to trust his judgment about his own family, but her instincts were screaming that something was wrong, and she learned to trust those instincts. I want to go to dinner today, she said finally. I don't want to let fear make decisions for me, and I don't want to give up on having a relationship with your family. But I need you to understand that I'm going to be extra careful. What does that mean? Kaya outlined her safety plan, bringing backup medications and leaving them in the car, eating only foods she prepared or watched being prepared, keeping her purse with her at all times, and making sure Marcus stayed close to her throughout the evening. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for several minutes. You're really scared, he said finally. Yes, I am. If you're this worried, maybe we should just skip dinner. We could say you're not feeling well or that I got called in for work. Kaya considered this. It would be the safe choice, the easy choice. But it would also mean letting fear control her life and possibly giving up any chance of ever having a normal relationship with Marcus's family. More importantly, if the Thompson family was planning something, skipping dinner would only delay the inevitable. They'd find another opportunity, another family gathering, another chance to catch her off guard. At least today, she was prepared and alert. No, she said firmly, I'm going. But Marcus, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If I tell you I want to leave, we leave immediately. No questions, no trying to smooth things over with your family, no staying for dessert. If I say we go, we go. Of course, absolutely. And I need you to pay attention today. Really pay attention. Not to your phone, not to work stress, not to trying to manage family dynamics. I need you to watch what's happening around me. Marcus reached for her hands. Kaya, I promise. I'll be right there with you. Nothing's going to happen to you, okay? Not on my watch. She squeezed his hands, drawing comfort from his sincerity. Okay. They spent the next hour getting ready in companionable silence. Marcus made them a light breakfast while Kaya packed her emergency supplies. She double-checked her primary EpiPen and Benadryl in her purse, then prepared a backup kit to leave in their car. A second EpiPen, more antihistamines, her emergency contact information, and a detailed list of her allergies and symptoms. As they prepared to leave for the Thompson house, Kaya made one final preparation that she didn't tell Marcus about. She sent a text to her best friend Sarah, a fellow nurse who knew all about her allergies and her concerns about Marcus's family. Heading to Thanksgiving dinner with the in-laws, still feeling uneasy about the weird questions they've been asking about my meds. Probably nothing, but wanted someone to know where I am. We'll text you when we leave tonight. If you don't hear from me by 10 p.m., call Marcus's phone. Sarah's response came immediately. Trust your instincts. Be safe. Love you. At 2 p.m., Marcus and Kaya climbed into his Honda Civic for the 20-minute drive to Lake Oswego. Kaya had insisted they take their own car rather than getting a ride from family members, ensuring they had their own transportation if they needed to leave quickly. As they drove through the familiar Portland neighborhoods, Kaya felt a strange sense of finality, as if she were crossing a bridge she couldn't uncross. Whatever happened at the Thompson house today would fundamentally change her relationship with Marcus's family, and possibly with Marcus himself. She'd made her decision. She would walk into what might be a trap, but she would walk in prepared.
She would give her family one final chance to prove her suspicions wrong, but she wouldn't be naive about it. "I love you," Marcus said quietly as they turned into his parents' driveway. "I love you too," Kaya replied, her hand instinctively checking for her purse and the life-saving medications inside. She had no idea she was about to discover that her worst fears hadn't been nearly dark enough.
The Thompson family home in Lake Oswego was a sprawling Tudor-style house that screamed old money and established authority. Perfectly manicured gardens surrounded the property, and the circular driveway was already filled with expensive cars. Jessica's BMW, David's lifted pickup truck, and Robert's black Mercedes sedan. As Marcus parked behind David's truck, Kaya took a deep breath and mentally reviewed her safety checklist. Purse secured with medications inside, backup supplies in the car trunk, emergency contact texted. Marcus briefed on the exit strategy. She was as prepared as she could possibly be. "Ready?" Marcus asked, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Ready," she lied. Linda Thompson answered the door wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress and her signature pearl necklace. Her smile was broader than usual, almost theatrical in its warmth. "Kaya, darling! So wonderful to see you!" Linda embraced her with unexpected enthusiasm, holding the hug just a beat longer than felt natural. "And Marcus, sweetie, you look tired. Are you working too hard?" "Just trying to close the Morrison deal before the holiday, but I'm all yours for the rest of the weekend." "Perfect! Come in, come in. Kaya, I hope you're hungry. I've prepared quite a feast, and I was so careful about all your dietary restrictions." The emphasis Linda placed on "so careful" sent a small chill down Kaya's spine, but she forced herself to smile graciously. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, Linda. I brought the tres leches cake I mentioned. It's a family recipe." "How lovely! David, come take Kaya's coat." David appeared from the living room, moving with more purpose than Kaya had ever seen from him before. Usually, he slouched around family gatherings in wrinkled clothes and a perpetual haze of beer breath. Today, he was clean-shaven, wearing pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, and his eyes were sharp and focused. "Here, let me help you with that," he said, reaching for Kaya's jacket while his gaze flickered meaningfully toward her purse. "Thank you, but I'll keep it with me," Kaya said smoothly, shifting her purse to her far shoulder. "I tend to get cold easily." David's hands hesitated for just a moment before he stepped back. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." The exchange lasted only seconds, but Kaya caught the slight tightening around David's eyes, the way his helpful demeanor flickered momentarily into something else. Marcus, engaged in conversation with his mother about work, missed the entire interaction. Jessica emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over her designer dress, her usual perfectly styled hair pulled back in what was meant to look like a casual ponytail, but had been clearly professionally arranged. "Kaya, I'm so glad you made it. Mom and I have been cooking all morning, making sure everything is absolutely perfect for you. I hope you don't mind, but we took the liberty of preparing some special dishes that should be completely safe for all your allergies." "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, Linda. I brought the tres leches cake I mentioned. It's a family recipe." "How lovely! Robert, come take Kaya's coat." Robert Thompson appeared in the doorway of his home office, closing the door behind him with deliberate precision. Kaya noticed he was wearing latex gloves, which he peeled off and discarded in a small trash can by the door before approaching them. "Kaya," he said in his deep, measured voice, "welcome." His greeting was polite but cold, exactly what she'd expected from him. What she hadn't expected was the way he studied her face, as if he were looking for something specific. His gaze lingered on her purse, just like David's had, before moving back to her eyes. "Thank you for having me, Robert," she replied, maintaining steady eye contact despite the way his attention made her skin crawl. "Marcus tells us you work with children at the hospital. That must require a lot of precision. Attention to detail, making sure medications are exactly right."
The comment seemed innocent enough, but combined with everything else, it felt loaded with meaning. Kaya's nursing instincts were screaming that something was very wrong with this entire situation. Yes, accuracy is crucial when working with pediatric patients. Children can't advocate for themselves the way adults can, so we have to be their protection. Something flickered across Robert's face. Annoyance? Amusement? Before he nodded curtly and excused himself to check on the game. Marcus, oblivious to the undercurrents in the conversation, was already being pulled toward the living room by his mother to see some new artwork she'd acquired. "Kaya, come see this painting Mom bought. It reminds me of that gallery we went to in Seattle." As they moved through the house, Kaya tried to memorize the layout. Front door, back door through the kitchen, side door from the garage. 2 staircases, one main, one servant stair near the kitchen. Multiple bathrooms where someone could isolate her if needed. Too many places where something could go wrong. The living room was warm and inviting, decorated with expensive furniture and family photos spanning decades. A large dining room table was visible through French doors, set for 6 with china that probably cost more than Kaya's monthly rent. "Can I get you something to drink?" Linda asked. "I made fresh cranberry juice, completely organic, no additives of any kind."
Just water would be great, thank you, Kaya replied quickly. She planned to drink only beverages she opened herself or watched being prepared from start to finish. "Oh, don't be silly. I insist you try the cranberry juice. I made it specially for you, checked every single ingredient to make sure it was safe." Linda's tone was light, but there was steel underneath it. "Mom makes amazing cranberry juice," Marcus added helpfully. "You should try it." Kaya found herself in exactly the kind of situation she'd feared, being pressured to consume something she couldn't verify as safe, with Marcus unknowingly supporting the pressure. She needed to refuse without creating a scene that would put Marcus in the middle. "I appreciate the effort, Linda, but I have a policy about only drinking things I can verify myself when it comes to my allergies. It's nothing personal. I do it everywhere, even at restaurants I trust completely." Linda's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Of course, dear. How cautious of you." David reappeared with a glass of water, offering it to Kaya with that same too helpful attitude. "Here you go, straight from the tap, nothing added." Kaya accepted the glass, but didn't drink from it immediately, instead setting it on a coaster on the coffee table. She planned to get her own water later, directly from the kitchen tap while someone was watching. "So, Kaya," Jessica said, settling into an armchair across from the sofa where Kaya and Marcus were sitting, "tell us about this cake you brought. Mom's been curious about the recipe." "It's tres leches, 3-milk cake. My grandmother taught my mother, and my mother taught me. It's something we always made for special occasions when I was growing up." "How exotic! And you made it in your own kitchen, I assume?" "Yes, this morning. I always prepare my own food for gatherings like this. It's easier than asking hosts to accommodate all my restrictions." "But you won't need to do that today," Jessica said brightly. "We've prepared everything with your allergies in mind. It would be such a shame if you didn't try the dishes we worked so hard on." Again, the pressure. Again, the insistence that she consume food prepared by people she didn't trust. Kaya was beginning to understand that this entire dinner was going to be a series of attempts to get her to ingest something she couldn't verify as safe. "I appreciate the effort, Linda, but I am sure you understand that my allergies are severe enough to be life-threatening. I have to be extremely careful." "Of course," Robert said from his position by the television, where he'd been pretending to watch football while obviously listening to every word of their conversation. "Life and death situations require appropriate responses." The way he said it made Kaya's blood run cold. It sounded less like sympathy and more like a threat. Marcus, finally picking up on some of the tension in the room, reached for Kaya's hand.
Are you okay? You seem nervous. Just the usual anxiety about family dinners, she replied, forcing a smile. You know how I get about my food restrictions in new situations. Well, you don't have to worry about anything here, Marcus said confidently. My family would never do anything to put you at risk. The look that passed between Linda, Jessica, and Robert at Marcus's words was so brief that Kaya almost missed it, but she caught it. A split second of shared understanding that excluded Marcus completely. Whatever they were planning, Marcus was definitely not part of it. That should have been a relief, but instead it made Kaya feel even more isolated. She was walking into a trap, and the person she loved most in the world had no idea he was helping to set it. Dinner should be ready in about an hour, Linda announced. Why don't we all relax and catch up? Kaya, you must tell us all about your work. David was just saying how interesting it must be to work with such vulnerable patients. As the conversation continued around topics that seemed innocent on the surface, but felt loaded with double meanings, Kaya realized that her safety plan was already being tested. Every drink offer, every food suggestion, every attempt to separate her from her purse or from Marcus was a probe, testing her defenses and looking for weaknesses. She was only 30 minutes into what was supposed to be a 4-hour family dinner, and she was already exhausted from the constant vigilance required to protect herself. But she was also learning something important. Whatever the Thompson family had planned, they needed her cooperation to make it work. As long as she stayed alert, stayed suspicious, and refused to let her guard down, she might just survive this. The real test would come when they sat down to eat.
The hour before dinner became a masterclass in psychological manipulation, though Kaya didn't fully understand what she was witnessing until much later. What she did recognize was that every member of the Thompson family, except Marcus, seemed to be following an invisible script, each playing a specific role in an elaborate performance. Linda had appointed herself as the overly attentive hostess, constantly hovering around Kaya with offers of food, drinks, and comfort items. Are you sure you're not cold, dear? I could turn up the heat. Or maybe you'd like a sweater. I have several that would look lovely on you. Each offer came with a reason for Kaya to leave her purse unattended, to try on a sweater upstairs, to step outside and admire the garden, to help in the kitchen where purses would just be in the way. Linda's suggestions were creative and persistent, but always delivered with that same theatrical warmth that felt increasingly sinister. Jessica had taken on the role of the concerned sister-in-law, sharing stories about other family members with food sensitivities and how the family had learned to accommodate them. But her stories were filled with subtle warnings, disguised as helpful information. You know, Marcus's cousin Emily thought she had a shellfish allergy for years, Jessica said, settling into the chair across from Kaya with a cup of tea. Turns out, she was just being overly cautious. When she finally tried lobster at her cousin's wedding, she was perfectly fine. Sometimes people think their allergies are worse than they actually are. That's interesting, Kaya implied carefully. But my allergies have been confirmed through multiple testing methods and emergency room visits. They're definitely real. Oh, of course. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I just think it's fascinating how the mind can convince the body of things that aren't necessarily true. The placebo effect works both ways, you know. It was a clever psychological tactic, planting seeds of doubt about the legitimacy of her allergies while maintaining plausible deniability. Jessica continued with more stories, each one designed to make Kaya question whether her dietary restrictions were as necessary as she believed. David's role was the most unsettling because it was so unlike his usual behavior. The lazy, disinterested young man Kaya had known for 6 months had been replaced by someone intensely focused on her every movement.
He positioned himself strategically throughout the afternoon, always within sight of her, always ready to help with anything she might need. When Kaya excused herself to use the bathroom, David immediately offered to show her where it was, even though she'd been to the house before. When she declined, he made sure to mention that there were several bathrooms available if the main one was occupied, providing detailed directions to each one. "The one upstairs is really nice," he said with inappropriate enthusiasm. "Great view of the backyard. Very private. You might prefer it." Kaya chose the powder room off the main hallway instead, close enough to the living room that she could hear the ongoing conversation. Even so, she hurried through her visit, uncomfortable with leaving Marcus alone with his family for too long. When she returned, she found Robert showing Marcus something on his tablet, construction plans for a new development project. Marcus was genuinely interested, asking technical questions about the engineering challenges, completely absorbed in the conversation. Meanwhile, Linda and Jessica were having what appeared to be a casual conversation about holiday preparations, but Kaya noticed they stopped talking the moment they saw her coming back into the room. "Everything all right, dear?" Linda asked with exaggerated concern. "You look a bit pale." "I'm fine, thank you," Kaya replied, reclaiming her seat next to Marcus and instinctively checking that her purse was still exactly where she'd left it. As the afternoon progressed, Kaya began to recognize patterns in the family's behavior that reminded her of something from her nursing training. During her psychiatric rotation, she'd learned about a manipulation technique called gaslighting, systematically undermining someone's perception of reality to make them doubt their own judgment. The Thompson family was employing a sophisticated version of this technique. They weren't directly contradicting her or calling her crazy. Instead, they were creating an environment where her perfectly reasonable safety precautions seemed excessive and paranoid. Every time she declined a drink, Linda would make a small comment about how particular she was. When she kept her purse closed, David would joke about how protective she was of her belongings. When she asked questions about food ingredients, Jessica would sigh and mention how complicated meal planning had become. None of these comments were overtly hostile. Any one of them could be dismissed as thoughtless rather than malicious, but together they created a constant pressure to abandon her safety measures to appear normal and trusting. Marcus, caught up in conversations about work and family updates, missed most of these subtle interactions. When he did notice Kaya seeming tense, his family was quick to redirect his attention. "Marcus, you simply must tell Kaya about the hiking trip David is planning," Linda would say. Or, "Jessica has the funniest story about her new listing," effectively pulling him back into family conversations that excluded Kaya.
The most disturbing pattern Kaya noticed was how the family seemed to be gathering information about her medical protocols. Their questions appeared casual and caring, but they were systematically learning about her emergency procedures. "Have you ever had to use one of those EpiPen things?" David asked during a lull in conversation. "How does it work exactly? Does someone need to call an ambulance right away, or do you have time to get to the hospital yourself?" Jessica wondered aloud. "I imagine those emergency medications work very quickly," Robert commented from his position by the television. "Minutes rather than hours, I'd assume." Each question required Kaya to explain her medical emergency protocols, giving them detailed information about timing, symptoms, and procedures. She realized too late that she was essentially providing them with a roadmap of exactly how her medical emergencies would unfold. But the most chilling moment came when Linda mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that their closest neighbor was a retired EMT. "Harold Peterson lives right next door," Linda said, gesturing toward the east side of the house. "He worked for Portland Fire and Rescue for 30 years. Such a comfort to know we have medical expertise so close by, don't you think? He's told me so many stories about emergency calls over the years." "That is comforting," Kaya agreed, though something about Linda's tone suggested this information wasn't meant to be reassuring.
Harold's always said that the key to handling medical emergencies is staying calm and following proper procedures, Linda continued. He says people panic and make mistakes, and that's when accidents happen, when someone thinks they know what to do but actually don't. The implication was subtle but clear. In a medical emergency, the family would defer to Harold Peterson's expertise rather than following Kaya's instructions about her own condition. They were establishing a medical authority figure who would be unknown to Kaya and potentially unwilling to listen to her guidance about her own treatment. As dinner time approached, Kaya found herself exhausted from the constant mental vigilance required to navigate the afternoon's conversations. Every interaction had been a test, every question a probe, every offer an opportunity for the family to learn more about her vulnerabilities or create opportunities for future manipulation. She was also beginning to understand that whatever the Thompson family had planned was far more sophisticated than she'd initially feared. This wasn't going to be a simple attempt to slip allergens into her food. They were orchestrating a complex scenario with multiple contingencies, backup plans, and carefully established narratives. When Linda finally announced that dinner was ready, Kaya felt a knot of dread form in her stomach. The learning phase was over. Whatever test they'd been preparing her for was about to begin. "Shall we move to the dining room?" Linda asked brightly. "I do hope everyone's hungry. We've prepared such a special meal." As they moved toward the dining room, Marcus took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You've been quiet this afternoon. Everything okay?" Kaya looked into his concerned face and realized that he genuinely had no idea what had been happening around him for the past 3 hours. His family had orchestrated their manipulation so carefully that he'd missed all of it while being present for every moment. "Just taking everything in," she replied. "Your family is very thorough." "They like you," Marcus said with satisfaction. "I can tell. Mom's been going out of her way to make you comfortable all afternoon." As they entered the dining room and Kaya saw the elaborate place settings, the multiple serving dishes, and the carefully arranged seating chart that would separate her from Marcus, she realized that comfort was the very last thing Linda Thompson had been trying to provide. The real test was about to begin, and Kaya was walking into it with a much better understanding of exactly who she was dealing with and exactly how much danger she was actually in.
The dining room was a masterpiece of subtle menace disguised as elegant hospitality. The mahogany table gleamed under the warm light of a crystal chandelier set with Linda's finest china and sterling silver. Fresh flowers from the garden created a beautiful centerpiece, and the entire scene looked like something from a magazine spread about perfect family gatherings. But Kaya noticed immediately that the seating arrangement had been carefully orchestrated. Her place card positioned her at the far end of the table for Marcus, with David to her left and Robert directly across from her. Linda would sit at the head of the table to her right, while Marcus and Jessica were placed at the opposite end, too far away for easy conversation. "I hope you don't mind," Linda said with false sweetness, "but I arranged the seating to give you the best view of the garden, and this chair has the softest cushions. I thought least. It also meant that Marcus would have difficulty seeing her clearly during the meal, and any distress signals would have to travel the length of the table." "This looks beautiful, Linda," Kaya said, accepting the seat with as much grace as she could muster. "You've gone to so much trouble." "No trouble at all, dear. Family is worth any effort." As they settled into their seats, Kaya kept her purse in her lap despite Linda's suggestion that she hang it on the back of her chair. Her emergency medications would stay within immediate reach no matter what social convention she had to break. The first course was a butternut squash soup that Linda presented with great fanfare. "This recipe has been in Robert's family for generations," she announced. "I made it with organic butternut squash, vegetable broth, and coconut cream, completely free of all your allergens." The soup looked delicious and smelled wonderful, but Kaya had learned enough about the Thompson family's methods to be deeply suspicious of anything they were particularly eager for her to consume. "It smells amazing," she said politely, "but I think I'll stick to the bread and salad for now. I don't want to spoil my appetite for the main course." Linda's smile tightened.
"Oh, but I made this especially for you. It would be such a shame not to try at least a little bite." "Mom makes incredible soup," Marcus called from his end of the table. "You really should try it, Kaya." Now she was trapped between Linda's insistence and Marcus's innocent encouragement. Refusing again would create exactly the kind of scene she'd been trying to avoid, potentially forcing Marcus to choose between supporting his wife or keeping peace with his family. "Well, maybe just a small taste," Kaya conceded, lifting her spoon. But as she brought the soup closer to her face, something made her pause. The smell was almost perfect. Rich butternut squash, warm spices, a hint of coconut. Almost perfect, but not quite. There was an undertone she couldn't identify, something that didn't belong in butternut squash soup. Her nursing training had taught her to trust her senses when something seemed off about medications or treatments. Right now, every instinct she had was screaming that something was wrong with the soup. "Actually," she said, setting down her spoon, "I'm feeling a bit queasy. I think I should stick to bland foods for now." "Queasy?" David asked with sudden interest. "What kind of queasy? Nauseous? Dizzy?" The specificity of his questions sent alarms through her mind. Why would David care about the exact nature of her discomfort unless he was expecting specific symptoms? "Just a little stomach upset," she said carefully. "Probably nerves about meeting the family." Robert leaned forward slightly. "Nerves can cause all sorts of physical reactions," he said in his measured voice. "Sometimes people think they're having allergic reactions when it's really just anxiety." "That's exactly what I was saying earlier," Jessica chimed in. "The mind is so powerful, it can convince your body that you're having a medical emergency when you're really just stressed." "My allergies are definitely physical, not psychological," she said firmly. "I've had blood tests and skin tests confirming all my sensitivities." "Of course, dear," Linda said soothingly. "No one's questioning your medical history. We're just saying that stress can make everything worse. Maybe you should try to relax and enjoy yourself." The suggestion to relax in this situation felt like a cruel joke, but Kaya forced herself to nod agreeably. "You're right, I should try to calm down." The main course arrived with even more ceremony than the soup. Linda and Jessica emerged from the kitchen carrying platters of turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole. Everything looked traditional and delicious, exactly what anyone would expect at a family Thanksgiving dinner.
"Now this," Linda announced with pride, "is completely safe for you. I used separate preparation surfaces for everything, washed all the cookware twice, and checked every single ingredient. You can eat anything on this table without worry." It was the moment Kaya had been dreading. Linda had effectively backed her into a corner where refusing to eat the carefully prepared meal would be not just rude, but insulting to the entire family. Marcus was already praising his mother's thoughtfulness, and everyone was looking expectantly at Kaya to show appropriate gratitude. "This is incredibly thoughtful," Kaya said, accepting small portions of turkey and mashed potatoes onto her plate. "Thank you for being so careful." But even as she spoke the words, she was studying the food on her plate with the analytical eye she'd developed from years of ingredient scrutiny. The mashed potatoes looked perfect. Too perfect. They had the smooth, uniform consistency that usually came from instant potatoes, but Linda would never serve anything instant at a formal dinner, unless she had needed to add something that required the uniform mixing that only instant potatoes could provide. The turkey looked normal, but there was something about the seasoning that caught her attention. Along with the expected herbs and spices, there seemed to be a faint shimmer on the skin, as if it had been coated with something additional. "The turkey looks amazing, Mom," Marcus said, taking a large bite. "What's your secret this year?" "Oh, just a special basting mixture I learned from a cooking show. A little soy sauce adds such depth of flavor." Kaya's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Soy sauce?" "Just a tiny bit," Linda said quickly. "I know you mentioned soy allergies, but I thought such a small amount cooked at high temperature would be completely safe. I researched it thoroughly." The room fell silent.
Even Marcus stopped chewing, suddenly understanding that something was very wrong. Soy is one of my most severe allergies. Any amount could trigger anaphylaxis. Cooking doesn't eliminate allergens. Oh my goodness, Linda gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a perfect performance of shock and dismay. I'm so sorry. I must have misunderstood. I thought you said it was just a mild sensitivity. I never said that. I've been very clear about the severity of all my allergies. Well, you haven't eaten any yet, so no harm done, Jessica said quickly. We can make you a fresh plate with just the vegetables. But Kaya was staring at the mashed potatoes on her fork, remembering that she had taken a small bite while they were talking. Her mouth suddenly felt dry and she could feel her heart rate beginning to increase. I think I may have ingested some already, she said, her voice carefully controlled despite the panic beginning to build in her chest. Are you feeling any symptoms? Robert asked, and there was something in his tone. Anticipation? Satisfaction? That made her blood run cold. Some tingling in my mouth, she admitted. It was the beginning of what could become a full anaphylactic reaction. Oh, that's probably just anxiety, David said dismissively, like we were talking about earlier. Sometimes people psych themselves into thinking they're having reactions. This isn't anxiety, Kaya said firmly, reaching for her purse. I need my EpiPen. But when she opened her purse, her blood turned to ice. The familiar shape of her EpiPen was there, but something was wrong. The label looked different. The color was slightly off, and when she picked it up, the weight wasn't right. With growing horror, she realized that someone had tampered with her life-saving medication with something else. The device in her hand looked like an EpiPen, but it wasn't her EpiPen. Someone tampered with my medication, she said, her voice cutting through the dining room like a knife. The Thompson family's expressions of concern suddenly seemed theatrical and false. Linda's gasped protests, Jessica's offers to help, David's suggestions that she was imagining things, it all felt like a rehearsed performance. That's impossible, Marcus said, leaning forward. No one would do that. Are you sure you're not just panicking? Even her husband was questioning her perception of reality, and Kaya realized that the Thompson family's afternoon of manipulation had been more effective than she had ever thought. They had successfully planted enough doubt about her mental state that even Marcus was beginning to wonder if she was having some kind of breakdown rather than a medical emergency. The tingling in her mouth was getting worse, and she could feel her throat beginning to tighten. She was definitely having an allergic reaction, and the one thing she needed most to save her life had been deliberately sabotaged. I need to get to a hospital, right now. Now, don't be hasty, Robert said in his calm, authoritative voice. Let's think about this rationally. You're upset. You're stressed, and you may be having a panic attack. Our neighbor Harold is an EMT. Why don't we call him over to take a look at you before we do anything drastic? It was exactly what Linda had set up earlier, an alternative medical authority who didn't know Kaya, wouldn't recognize her symptoms, and might be convinced that she was having a psychological episode rather than a medical emergency. As her symptoms worsened and the room began to blur around the edges, Kaya realized that she had walked into a trap far more sophisticated and deadly than she had ever imagined. The Thompson family hadn't just planned to poison her, they had orchestrated an entire scenario where her murder would look like either an accident or a mental health crisis. And with her EpiPen replaced with something useless, she was rapidly running out of time to save her own life.
Time slowed to a crawl as Kaya felt her throat beginning to close. The familiar progression of anaphylactic shock was unmistakable to someone who had lived with severe allergies for 18 years. The tingling had spread from her mouth to her lips and tongue, her breathing was becoming labored, and angry red hives were erupting across her neck and arms. She had minutes, maybe less, before the reaction became irreversible. I'm calling 911, she announced, reaching for her phone with trembling hands.
Wait, Robert said, standing up from his chair with deliberate authority. Let's not overreact. Harold Peterson has dealt with hundreds of medical emergencies. Let him assess the situation first. Dad's right, David added, moving to block Kaya's path toward the front door. You don't want to waste emergency resources if this is just a panic attack. Even through her increasing distress, Kaya recognized the tactical positioning. David was blocking her primary exit route, while Robert commanded the room's attention, and Linda was already reaching for the landline to call their neighbor instead of emergency services. This is not a panic attack, Kaya said, her voice becoming hoarse as her airway continued to narrow. I'm going into anaphylactic shock. Honey, maybe you should sit down, Marcus said, genuine concern replacing his earlier doubt as he finally saw the physical symptoms manifesting on her skin. You don't look good. But even Marcus's worry was playing into his family's hands. They wanted her to sit down, to wait for their neighbor, to delay getting real medical treatment until it was too late to save her. Kaya's nursing training kicked into overdrive. She had seen patients die from delayed treatment of anaphylaxis. She knew that every second mattered, and she knew that the people surrounding her were counting on her compliance to ensure their plan succeeded. Move, she told David, her voice carrying the authority she used with uncooperative patients in the hospital. Kaya, please, he said, spreading his arms as if to embrace her. You're scaring everyone. Just let Harold take a look at you. Linda was already on the phone with their neighbor, describing Kaya's symptoms as anxiety-related and possibly psychological. Jessica was offering to get her a cool washcloth and suggesting she lie down on the couch. Marcus was hovering helplessly, torn between his training to trust his family and the evidence of his wife's obvious medical distress. But none of them were accounting for the fact that Kaya had spent years working in emergency medicine. She had trained for crisis situations, and she had learned to function under extreme pressure when lives were on the line, including her own. Instead of arguing further, Kaya suddenly pivoted toward the kitchen, moving faster than her symptoms should have allowed. Years of navigating hospital corridors during emergencies had taught her to push through physical limitations when necessary. Where are you going? Jessica called, but Kaya ignored her. The kitchen represented her best chance of survival. It had a back door that might not be guarded, a landline phone separate from the one Linda was monopolizing, and potential alternative medications in the family's medicine cabinet. But more importantly, it had something she desperately needed: evidence. Kaya pulled out her cell phone and began taking photos of everything: the cooking surfaces, the empty containers, the trash can where she could see discarded packaging. Her hands were shaking badly from the allergic reaction, but she managed to capture images of a soy sauce bottle on the counter, an empty instant mashed potato box in the recycling bin, and most damning of all, her actual EpiPen sitting on the kitchen windowsill next to what appeared to be the fake device they had substituted into her purse. What are you doing? Linda demanded, appearing in the kitchen doorway. Documenting evidence, Kaya gasped, her breathing becoming more labored by the second. You switched my EpiPen with a fake one. That's ridiculous, Linda protested. But her eyes were fixed on the windowsill, where the two devices sat side by side, one clearly genuine, the other a clever replica. Kaya grabbed her real EpiPen, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. But before she could inject herself, David appeared behind his mother and lunged forward, trying to knock the device from her hands. Don't let her hurt herself, he shouted. She's having a breakdown. The struggle that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. David's attempt to grab the EpiPen sent both of them stumbling backwards, and in the chaos, the device clattered across the kitchen floor, sliding under the refrigerator where neither of them could reach it. Now look what you've done, Jessica said, entering the kitchen behind David. Harold's on his way over, but you've worked yourself into such a state that you're making everything worse.
Kaya's vision was starting to tunnel, and she could feel her blood pressure dropping as her body went into shock. She had lost her real EpiPen, she was surrounded by people who wanted her dead,
and her husband was still in the dining room being manipulated by his father. But she still had one advantage they didn't know about: the backup emergency kit in her car. "I need my car keys," she announced, reaching for Marcus's jacket where she'd seen him hang them by the kitchen door. "Absolutely not," Robert said, materializing in the doorway like a guardian blocking her escape. "You're in no condition to drive. You could kill someone." "The only person who's going to die is me if I don't get medical treatment," Kaya shot back, but her voice was barely a whisper now. It was then that Harold Peterson arrived, entering through the kitchen door without knocking. He was exactly what Kaya had feared, a man in his 70s who clearly viewed this as a favor to his neighbors rather than a genuine medical emergency. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, looking around the kitchen with mild confusion. "Kaya's having some kind of anxiety attack. She thinks she's having an allergic reaction, but we're not sure if it's real or psychological." Harold approached Kaya with the patronizing manner of someone who had already decided she was a hysterical woman rather than a patient in crisis. "Let me take a look at you, honey. What exactly are you feeling?" "Anaphylactic shock. Soy allergy. Need epinephrine immediately." But even as she spoke, she could see Harold dismissing her self-diagnosis. He was looking at her the way medical professionals sometimes looked at patients they believed were drug-seeking or attention-seeking, with skepticism rather than concern. "Well, you're conscious and talking, so it can't be that severe," he said, reaching for her wrist to check her pulse. "Let's just calm down and see how you feel in a few minutes." It was exactly the delay the Thompson family had been counting on. By the time Harold realized this was a genuine medical emergency, it would be too late to save her. But Harold made one crucial mistake. When he reached for her wrist, he moved close enough for Kaya to spot something on his belt, a radio clipped to his jacket that was obviously connected to emergency services. With the last of her strength, Kaya snatched the radio and pressed the emergency button before anyone could stop her. "Emergency! Emergency!" she gasped into the device. "This is Kaya Ramirez, RN, at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm in anaphylactic shock at 1247 Lakeview Drive in Lake Oswego. Family members have tampered with my EpiPen and are preventing me from getting treatment. Send ambulance immediately." The chaos that followed her transmission was immediate and decisive. Harold tried to grab the radio back, insisting she was having a mental health crisis, but it was too late. Her message had gone out over emergency frequencies, and protocol required an immediate response. Within minutes, she could hear sirens approaching the house. The Thompson family's carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart, and they knew it. "You've made a terrible mistake," Robert said, quietly, his mask of concern finally slipping to reveal the cold calculation underneath. "No one will believe you over our entire family." But Kaya had spent the last few minutes of consciousness wisely. Her phone was still recording everything, documenting their attempts to prevent her from getting medical treatment and their efforts to convince the EMT that she was mentally unstable rather than physically dying. As the paramedics burst through the kitchen door, Kaya managed to hand her phone to the lead EMT before collapsing completely. "Everything's documented. Photos of evidence, recording of what they did." The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the look of pure rage on Linda Thompson's face as she realized that their perfect plan had been completely exposed. Kaya had not only survived their attempt to murder her, she had gathered the evidence that would destroy them all. Kaya woke up in the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital 3 days later, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of the place where she worked. The steady beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell of cleaning supplies, and the soft whoosh of the ventilation system were oddly comforting after the nightmare she had survived. Her throat was raw from the intubation that had saved her life, and IV lines snaked from both arms, delivering the medications that had pulled her back from the brink of death. But she was alive, and according to the chart at the foot of her bed, she was going to make a full recovery. Dr. Patricia Chen, The emergency physician who had treated her that night was the first person she saw when she opened her eyes. "Welcome back, Kaya," Dr. Chen said with genuine relief. "You gave us quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Kaya croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "But alive, thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank your quick thinking and professional training. The evidence you collected and the emergency call you made saved your life. Without that radio transmission, we might not have gotten to you in time." Dr. Chen pulled up a chair beside Kaya's bed, her expression growing serious. "I need you to know that what happened to you wasn't just attempted murder. It was one of the most sophisticated and premeditated attacks I've seen in 20 years of emergency medicine." Over the next hour, Dr. Chen explained what the investigation had revealed. The fake EpiPen that had been substituted for Kaya's real medication wasn't just an empty shell. It had been filled with a saline solution designed to look like epinephrine but provide no medical benefit. The soy sauce contamination in the turkey had been carefully calculated to trigger a severe but not immediately fatal reaction, giving the family time to prevent her from getting proper treatment. Most chilling of all, toxicology tests had revealed traces of an antihistamine blocker in the mashed potatoes, a substance that would have made her allergic reaction worse and prevented any oral medications from helping her. "They didn't just want you to have a reaction," Dr. Chen explained. "They wanted to ensure that any treatment you tried to give yourself would be ineffective. This was planned down to the smallest detail." The legal consequences had been swift and severe. Portland police had arrested Linda, Robert, Jessica, and David Thompson within hours of Kaya's emergency room admission. The evidence she had collected, the photos, the audio recordings, and the physical evidence found in the kitchen, had provided prosecutors with an airtight case. Harold Peterson, the neighbor EMT, had been suspended from his volunteer position pending investigation into his failure to recognize and treat a legitimate medical emergency. His initial report describing Kaya's condition as anxiety-related had been contradicted by every piece of medical evidence from that night. But the most devastating revelation came when police searched the Thompson family home with a warrant. They had found detailed notes about Kaya's allergies, research into how long anaphylactic reactions took to become fatal, and most damning of all, internet searches for how to make fake EpiPen and untraceable food allergies. The family had been planning her murder for months. Marcus visited her on the 4th day, looking like he had aged years in the span of a week. His eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and his hands shook as he pulled a chair close to her bedside. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, unable to meet her eyes. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I should have believed you when you said something was wrong." Kaya studied her husband's face, seeing genuine anguish and guilt written in every line. "You couldn't have known, Marcus. They fooled you too. But I'm supposed to be on your side. When you told me about the weird questions, when you said you felt uncomfortable, I dismissed your concerns. I chose my family over my wife, and they almost killed you because of it." It was a conversation they'd need to have many times in the coming months, Kaya realized. Marcus's betrayal hadn't been intentional, but it had been real. His willingness to dismiss her instincts and concerns had made her vulnerable to her family's attack. "We'll figure it out," she said finally. "But right now, I need you to tell me everything you know about their plan. The police will want a complete statement."
Marcus had spent the previous days going through years of family interactions with new eyes, and what he had discovered horrified him. Comments he had dismissed as his mother being particular about guests had actually been Linda gathering intelligence about Kaya's medical conditions. David's sudden interest in her work schedule had been him tracking when she would be most vulnerable. Jessica's questions about their future plans had been attempts to determine if Kaya's death would benefit Marcus financially. "They never accepted our marriage," Marcus said, "but I thought they just didn't like you because you're different from what they expected. I never imagined they would try to murder you."
The most heartbreaking revelation was that the Thompson family had viewed Kaya not just as an outsider, but as a threat to their social status and family wealth. Linda had been heard telling a neighbor that Marcus's marriage to that Mexican nurse was an embarrassment that needed to be corrected. Over the following weeks, as Kaya recovered physically and began processing the trauma psychologically, the full scope of the Thompson family's crimes continued to unfold. Police investigators discovered that this hadn't been their first attempt to eliminate someone they viewed as a problem. Robert Thompson's former business partner, the man who had sued him years earlier, had suffered a suspicious accident just before their court date. The case had been dropped when the partner was hospitalized with injuries that prevented him from testifying. Jessica's real estate rival, a successful agent who had been competing for the same luxury listings, had experienced a mysterious break-in where only personal documents and client information had been stolen. The woman's career had been destroyed by the breach of confidentiality, while Jessica had acquired all her former clients. The pattern was unmistakable. The Thompson family had been using intimidation, sabotage, and violence to eliminate threats and obstacles for years. They had simply gotten more sophisticated with each crime. 3 months after Thanksgiving, the entire Thompson family was convicted on charges ranging from attempted murder to conspiracy to commit fraud. Linda received 25 years to life. Robert got 30 years for masterminding the plot. Jessica was sentenced to 20 years for her role in the psychological manipulation. David, whose assault on Kaya during the struggle for the EpiPen was captured on her phone's recording, received 15 years. Harold Peterson was found guilty of negligent endangerment and lost his medical certifications permanently. His failure to properly assess and treat Kaya's condition nearly cost her life. The convictions made national news, with legal experts calling it one of the most elaborate attempted murders in Oregon history. The case became a training example for emergency medical personnel about the importance of taking patient self-advocacy seriously, regardless of external pressures or family dynamics. For Kaya, the legal victory felt less important than the personal journey of recovery and rebuilding. She had taken a leave of absence from her nursing position to focus on healing, both physically and emotionally. The trauma of nearly being murdered by her husband's family had shaken her faith in her ability to read people and situations accurately. But she had also discovered reserves of strength and intelligence she hadn't known she possessed. Her quick thinking and professional training had saved her own life when no one else would. She had faced down a sophisticated murder plot and emerged victorious through her own courage and competence. 6 months after the attack, Kaya returned to work in the pediatric ward. Her experience had given her an even deeper appreciation for vulnerable patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. She had learned firsthand what it felt like to have medical concerns dismissed and discredited, and she was determined that none of her young patients would ever experience that abandonment. Her marriage to Marcus survived, but it was fundamentally changed. They attended couples therapy for months, working through the betrayal and rebuilding trust. Marcus had to confront the reality that his family were criminals who had tried to murder his wife, while Kaya had to learn to trust that her husband truly hadn't known about their plans. The process was painful, but ultimately healing. They emerged with a stronger relationship built on complete honesty and mutual advocacy. Marcus learned to trust Kaya's instincts completely, while Kaya learned that not everyone who disappointed her was automatically an enemy. A year later, they bought a house on the other side of Portland, far from Lake Oswego and the memories associated with that neighborhood. They hosted their first Thanksgiving in their new home, surrounded by Kaya's family and their closest friends. The guest list was small, but filled with people who truly cared about both of them. As Kaya looked around the table at the faces of people who had supported her through the worst experience of her life, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived an attempt on her life, seen justice done to her attackers, and rebuilt her life on a foundation of truth and genuine love. The naive optimism that once made her vulnerable to manipulation was gone, replaced by hard-won wisdom about human nature and the importance of trusting her own instincts when something feels wrong. The young nurse who had once seen good in everyone had learned that some people are genuinely dangerous, but she had also learned that she was strong enough to survive anything and smart enough to save herself when no one else would.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.